The first thing Sarah Whitmore noticed about his profile was that he barely existed. 4 photos, no tagged locations, no friends visible, a bio that read like it had been written by someone trying very hard to sound like they didn't care what anyone thought. She almost swiped past it, but then came the messages. Long ones, thoughtful ones. He wrote about Camus at 11 at night and about the way silence feels different in an empty house versus an empty forest. He asked her questions nobody had ever bothered to ask her before. What do you believe happens after we die? What's the loneliest you've ever felt? Do you think people can really change? His name was Derek Voss. At least that's the name on the app. For 6 weeks, they talked every single day. Not the empty kind of talking either. Real conversations that stretched past midnight that made her phone battery die twice in 1 week. She told her roommate about him. She told her mother about him. She started saying we before there was technically a we. I don't really do social media anymore, he told her the second week. Had a following once, got in my head too much, deleted it all. It should have bothered her more than it did. Her profile literally said she wasn't interested in guys with some big online presence, some curated highlight reel of a life. So when he explained it away like that, it fit too perfectly into what she already wanted to believe. She didn't question it. She should have. The photos he sent were the kind that made her stomach flip a little every time she opened them. Dark hair, sharp jaw, easy smile, the kind of tall that photographs well from every angle. A guy standing next to a black pickup truck in one, laughing at something off camera in another. You're kind of out of my league, she typed one night, half joking. You have no idea how wrong that is, he wrote back. He was vague about work, said something in healthcare, something about helping people, something that always got interrupted before he finished the sentence. Long story, he'd say. Tell you in person. 3 separate times they made plans to meet, and 3 separate times something came up on his end. A shift got extended. His car broke down, family emergency. Each excuse arrived with an apology so sincere it made her feel guilty for being disappointed. By the 4th attempt, she was already picturing it. The 2 of them at that little wine bar downtown, candlelight, his laugh in person instead of just in text. She'd told her roommate, Ashley, that this one felt different, that this one felt real. Just be careful, Ashley said, not looking up from her phone. You've never even video called the guy. He doesn't like video calls, camera shy. Ashley gave her a look. Sarah ignored it. She had gotten very good over 6 weeks at ignoring things. The night of the 4th attempt, she sat in her car outside the restaurant 15 minutes early, checking her makeup in the visor mirror, practicing the way she'd say hi, practicing not seeming too eager. Her hands were actually shaking a little. She hadn't felt this nervous about anyone in years. At 7:04, a text came through. I'm here, table by the window. She looked up through the windshield at the restaurant's front window. There was a man sitting there, alone, facing the door. He did not look anything like his photos. Not the hair, not the build, not even close to the height those pictures had implied through careful angles and captions like 6'2" and still growing LOL. This man was shorter, heavier through the shoulders in a different way, his hair a dull brown instead of black, his face rounder, softer, entirely unfamiliar. For a full 10 seconds, Sarah just sat there in her car, engine off, hand still on the door handle, staring at a stranger wearing her boyfriend's name. Then he looked up, straight through the glass, straight at her car, and he smiled. The exact same easy smile from the photos, transplanted onto a completely different face. He raised his hand and waved her inside. She told herself, walking across that parking lot, that people catfish all the time, that it was probably vanity, insecurity, some sad guy who'd grabbed a stranger's photos off the internet because his real face didn't feel like enough. Annoying, manipulative even, but not dangerous, not the kind of thing that should make the back of her neck prickle the way it currently was. She was too polite to turn around, that was the truth of it. 6 weeks of connection sitting behind her like a hand at her back, pushing her toward the door. Sarah? He stood as she approached, taller than she'd expected, but nothing like the photos had promised. I know, okay? Just give me 5 minutes before you leave, please. His name, he told her once they sat down, was actually Tyler. Tyler Bramlett. Derek didn't exist. The pictures belonged to some guy from Ohio he'd found on an old forum, a guy who probably had no idea his face had been living a second life on a dating app 3 states away. I didn't think anyone would actually want to talk to me if they saw what I really looked like, Tyler said, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like a kid confessing to a broken window. You seemed different from anyone else on there. I didn't want to lose that before it even started. It was pathetic. It was also somehow kind of understandable, and that was the part that scared her later, looking back. How quickly understandable became an excuse to stay. The conversation that followed felt exactly like their late-night texts had, easy, funny, weirdly intimate. He remembered every small detail she'd ever mentioned, her fear of moths, her dead grandmother's recipe for pot roast, the panic attack she'd had during finals sophomore year that she'd only told 2 people about, ever. 2 hours passed like 20 minutes. When he walked her to her car, she gave him her number for real this time, not the app's messaging system, and she let him hug her goodbye, and she drove home feeling something confusing and warm and stupid. Ashley was less charmed by the update. He catfished you for 6 weeks and you gave him your actual phone number? People do dumb stuff out of insecurity, Ash. He apologized. He was really sweet about it in person. And the medical field thing? Sarah paused. He said he'd explain later. Later came 3 dates after that. They were sitting on the hood of his car. The black pickup from the photos didn't exist either, it turned out, another borrowed detail. Parked at the edge of a quiet park after dark, sharing a bag of gas station snacks like teenagers. When he told her the truth about his job, there wasn't one, not really. He'd worked a few months at a warehouse, then nothing, then some cash jobs he described in a way that made it clear she shouldn't ask more. No stable income, no healthcare career. Another lie, dissolved. She should have driven home right then. She has thought about that moment more times than she can count since the exact fork in the road, the exact second she could have started the engine and never looked back. Instead, she asked him quietly why he'd lied about all of it. Tyler went very still. Then he laughed, a short, strange sound with no real humor in it. Because the truth doesn't usually go over great, he said. I figured I'd tell you eventually, once you already liked me too much to leave. He was still smiling when he said it. That was the part she couldn't shake on the drive home. Not the words themselves, but the smile underneath them, easy and warm, like he'd just told her something charming instead of something that should have sent her running. She didn't run. 2 weeks later, on a night that started out like any other, he would tell her something far worse than a lie. And he would tell it to her laughing. By the 5th week of actually knowing him, the real him, or whatever version of real he was capable of, Sarah had stopped mentioning Tyler to most people. Ashley still asked, but the questions had gotten shorter, more careful, the way you ask about a friend you suspect is in something they can't see clearly. He's just misunderstood, Sarah found herself saying, more than once. He had a rough childhood. He's trying to be better. She didn't know yet how much weight that sentence would eventually have to carry. They were at his apartment, small, sparse, oddly tidy in a way that felt less like cleanliness and more like a man who owned very little and had nothing to put away. They'd ordered pizza. They were half watching some true crime documentary, the kind of background noise neither of them was really absorbing when he started talking. It came out of nowhere, no lead up, no context. 1 second he was making fun of the narrator's dramatic voice, and the next he was telling her in the same casual tone about the animals. When I was a kid, I used to mess with animals, he said. Not hurt, not kill, mess with, like it was mischief, like it was scraped knees and broken windows. Like a lot of animals, strays mostly, but not just strays. Sarah felt something cold slide down through her chest. What do you mean, not just strays? He shrugged, eyes still on the TV. Neighbors' pets sometimes. There was this cat that used to sit on our fence every morning. Orange one. I don't know. I didn't really get back then that it mattered, that it was a whole living thing with its own, experience of the world. I just saw something small that couldn't fight back. He laughed. An actual laugh. Short and low, remembering something specific he did not share. I know how that sounds, he added, glancing at her like this was a mildly awkward admission and not something else entirely. But I didn't know any better. Nobody ever taught me that stuff mattered. You don't get raised the way I got raised and come out normal. Sarah sat very still on his secondhand couch, pizza slice going cold and untouched in her hand, and she felt the entire architecture of the last 2 months quietly rearrange itself into something unrecognizable. How many? She heard herself ask. Her voice didn't sound like her own. How many animals? I don't know. I didn't keep count. He said it like she'd asked how many books he'd read that year. Then, seeing something in her face finally register, he softened, leaned forward, took her hand. Hey, that was a different me, a kid who didn't know what he had, who nobody ever showed a shred of decency to. I'm not that person anymore. You were laughing, she said. 2 seconds ago. You were laughing about it. I laugh about a lot of dark stuff. It's a coping thing. He squeezed her hand, and his palm was warm, and his eyes looked genuinely wounded that she'd flinched. I've done a lot of work on myself since then. I actually want to go into counseling, help kids who grew up how I grew up, turn it into something good. I want to fix what I broke in whatever way I can. Maybe that was true. Sarah wanted badly for that to be true. She sat there in his quiet apartment with the documentary murmuring in the background, and she looked at the hand holding hers. The same hand, she couldn't stop thinking, the very same hand. And she tried to build a bridge in her mind between the boy he was describing and the man sitting 6 inches away from her. She couldn't quite finish building it. I should probably head home, she said. Something flickered across his face, gone almost as fast as it appeared. But she saw it. Yeah, he said slowly. Yeah, of course. He walked her to the door. He hugged her the same way he always did. And as she stepped out into the hallway, he said one more thing, quiet, almost to himself, in a voice she would replay in her head for weeks afterward. I really don't want you to be scared of me, Sarah. She hadn't said she was. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed with her phone propped against her chest, scrolling nothing in particular, replaying the sound of his laugh every time she closed her eyes. Not hurt, messed with, an orange cat on a fence. She kept trying to picture the child version of him doing what he'd described so lightly, and every time her brain built the image, it recoiled and threw it away. At 2 a.m., a text came through. You still up? She stared at it a long time before answering. Yeah. You okay? You seemed off when you left. She typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. What she wanted to say was, you told me you tortured animals for fun, and now I can't stop picturing your hands doing it. What she actually sent was, just tired, long week. Okay. Get some rest. I care about you a lot, you know that, right? She turned her phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling until the sky outside her window started to lighten. Over the next few days, Ashley noticed the shift before Sarah said a word about it. You look like you haven't slept, Ashley said, setting 2 mugs of coffee down on the kitchen table. What happened? So Sarah told her. All of it. The laugh, the orange cat, the hand squeeze, and the I'm not that person anymore. She watched Ashley's face go from concerned to something closer to alarmed, watched her set her coffee down without drinking it. Sarah, that's not a quirky backstory. That's not a rough childhood thing. Do you understand that's a documented actual warning sign? That's the kind of thing therapists specifically screen for in... Ashley stopped herself, chose her next words more carefully. I'm not saying he's dangerous now. I don't know him. But I know you're describing someone who told you he hurt defenseless animals for fun and laughed about it while telling you. That is not a small thing to just move past. He said he's changed. He wants to help people now. Go into counseling. Do you believe that? Sarah didn't answer right away, and that silence said more than anything she could have put into words. The problem, the real tangled, impossible problem, was that leaving didn't feel simple anymore. It hadn't felt simple since that first laugh. Because underneath all of it, underneath the catfishing and the lies about his job and now this, there was still a version of Tyler that knew exactly what to say to her at exactly the right moment. Who remembered her grandmother's pot roast recipe? Who told her more than once that she was the first person who ever made him think he could actually be different? That was the part nobody warned you about. Not the fear exactly. The fear was almost easier to sit with because fear made sense. Fear had a clear shape. What was harder was the guilt sitting right next to it. Guilt for wanting to pull away from someone who kept insisting, gently, patiently, that he was trying so hard to be good. She started responding to his texts slower, shorter. She told herself it was because of work, because of a headache, because of anything other than the truth. He noticed. Of course he noticed. "Feels like you're pulling away from me," he texted 4 days after the pizza night. Did I do something? She stared at that message for a long time. Then, because she was tired and scared and still, despite everything, not entirely sure she trusted her own read on the situation, she typed back, "No, sorry, just been really busy. Everything's fine." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Okay, I just don't want to lose you over something I can't take back. You're the only person who's ever actually stuck around long enough to know the real me." She set the phone down on the counter and pressed both hands flat against her face. She didn't know, not yet, that he was already driving toward her apartment. He didn't show up that night, not the next one either. But 3 days later, a knock came at her apartment door at 9:40 p.m. unannounced, and through the peephole, she saw him standing in the hallway with a small paper bag from the Thai place she'd once mentioned liking. She almost didn't open it. Ashley, home for once, stood a few feet behind her in the kitchen, watching, arms crossed, saying nothing but clearly ready to. Sarah opened the door. "Hey," Tyler said, holding up the bag like an offering. "I know you said you were just busy, but it felt like more than that. I wanted to check on you in person. That okay?" It wasn't okay. Every instinct in her body was screaming that it wasn't okay. But 6 weeks of connection and 3 more of complicated, guilty tenderness pulled the words out of her anyway. "Yeah," she said. "Come in." They sat at her kitchen table. Ashley disappeared into her room with a look Sarah couldn't quite decode. Worry, warning, maybe both. Tyler talked easily about his week, about a counseling program he said he'd started looking into online, about how much better he'd been feeling since he got that off his chest with her the other night. "It actually helped, telling you," he said. "I've never told anyone that before, not even my last serious girlfriend. I think I needed you to know the whole truth of who I was so we could actually build something real." Sarah nodded along, picking at the food she wasn't eating, and underneath the table, her leg wouldn't stop bouncing. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally, "and you actually answer honestly?" "Always." "If I said I needed some space, real space, would you be okay with that?" The question sat in the air a beat too long. Something passed behind his eyes. Not anger exactly, something quieter and stranger, something that made the hair on her arms rise before he even opened his mouth to answer. Then it smoothed over, fast, so fast she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. "Of course," he said, voice soft, hurt, entirely reasonable. "I'd never want you to feel trapped. I hope it's not because of me, because of what I told you. I really am trying, Sarah. I don't have a lot of people who give me a chance to try." That night, after he left, hugging her a beat too long at the door, saying, "Text me when you land somewhere with your head, okay?" Like she was the one who needed steadying. Sarah sat on her bathroom floor with her back against the tub and finally let herself cry. Not because he'd threatened her. He never once did. That was the thing Ashley couldn't fully understand from outside it, and the thing Sarah could barely explain even to herself. He was never cruel to her. Never raised his voice, never once made a move that a stranger watching would call frightening. He simply told her once, laughing, exactly what he was capable of. And then he asked her, gently, sweetly, over and over, to look past it. She blocked his number 2 days later, hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to hit confirm. She changed her locks. She told her building's front desk not to buzz anyone up under his name. For a week, nothing happened. No texts, no knocks. Just a silence that should have felt like relief and instead felt like waiting for a sound that hadn't come yet. Then, on a Tuesday evening, walking home from the store 2 blocks from her apartment, she passed a man crouched on the sidewalk near a storm drain, gently coaxing a stray cat out with a piece of deli meat, murmuring something soft and soothing to it in a voice she would recognize anywhere. He didn't look up as she passed. He didn't need to. The cat, orange and thin, crept closer to his outstretched hand. Sarah didn't stop walking. She didn't run either. She just kept her eyes forward, her keys laced tight between her fingers, and counted every single step back to her building, all the way up the stairs, all the way until the deadbolt clicked shut behind her. She never found out if the cat was fine. She has never stopped wondering.